I have to admit, I used to be a little bit of a book snob. I wouldn't even consider a Kindle, let alone an audiobook. It just felt like cheating. But that is until I tried Audible and Open Audible. Ever wonder where I find the time to read all the books that my guests have written on this show? Well, this is the answer. When I'm behind in my reading, I just jump to audiobook. Open Audible is a cross-platform audiobook manager designed for Audible users that can allow you to download, view, manage, and connect your favorite audiobooks on MP3 so that you can enjoy them across all your devices. Best of all, you can control it all from a desktop application. I'm giving away a copy of Open Audible for the entire month of November. All you have to do is sign up to my mailing list. You'll find the link in the description below, or go to openaudible.org for more information. If you write articles or copy, or even work as an editor for a magazine, you're going to want to listen to this advert. Are you looking to save time writing online content? Well, Phosphor AI is an online service that will save you hours of work with your content creation. All you have to do is type in your title, and their AI software will get to work writing a high-quality original article just for you. You'll need to review the article and take 15 to 20 minutes to make necessary edits, but then the piece will be ready for publishing. Just for signing up, you'll get 3 free articles so you can try out Phosphor AI and see what it can do all for yourself. Why waste time writing online content yourself when you can get Phosphor AI to do it for you? Try out their service today and see just how much time you can save. That's Phosphor AI. Go to phosphorai.com. Stand you. They're very good at that. Anyway, so yeah, let's get going.
Okay.
So record. Wonderful. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I'm here with Jeff Eder, the co-founder of Progressive Money Canada. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I came across your website after watching a documentary, which name now escapes me, but it was the same one through which I found the guys from the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, who were a lot of fun to have on the show. But you have a slightly different take on the financial system than they do, so I'm really interested to get to grips with, sort of the sovereign money system and everything that comes along with it. So, yeah, why don't we actually just start there? Like, do you want to explain for people what a sovereign money system would be or what it would look like?
Yeah, basically it's relatively straightforward. It's when the government creates all the money in circulation and the money creation privileges of private banks is removed. So right away, as soon as I say that, a lot of people are going to be confused because they think, oh, doesn't the government create all the money anyway? Which is completely untrue. The majority of money in circulation right now is digital, and it's created by privately owned commercial banks have been given this extraordinary privilege to create money through the loans process. So whenever you get a loan from a bank, new money is created. This is also called expanding the balance sheet, because after the loans officer is satisfied you're a good risk, he or she will simply type into existence new money by simultaneously entering the principal amount on both the asset and liability side of the bank's balance sheet. And of course, that's the first problem in our current system, is that new money is only created if a bank thinks it can make a profit, which is normally contrary to the public good.
Actually, can I just stop you there for a second? Is anyone keeping track, like actually keeping track of who is printing how much, or who is creating how much out of thin air with some keystrokes?
Yeah, it's usually you can do it through monetary aggregates. So you can do a simple calculation in your own country. Here are the most liquid form of are you familiar with monetary aggregates?
With like the M1 and M2 money supply.
Exactly. So basically, the higher on the list, the more liquid that particular monetary aggregate is. So the most liquid is cash. But it's become so insignificant that here in Canada, we don't even have a singular monetary aggregate for cash. We have M1 plus, and cash is in that monetary aggregate, but it doesn't sit there by itself. So if you compare that to, say, M3, which means all other monetary aggregates, which would be, say, you have like a term deposit, something like that, something that's slightly less liquid, but you can turn it into cash quite quickly. So you can divide cash into the amount of new money that's created, the digital money. And in Canada, it's about 2.4% cash compared with and the other percentage, which is like 96.46 or something like that, is digital money. And that's all created through the loans process. So it's and plus, even if you want to get cash, you still have to trade your digital money to get that cash.
Yeah. I can't believe it's that low. It's only 2.4%. The rest is all just like digitally held.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, it's easy to verify. Like I'm not familiar with your central bank, but the Bank of Canada is very transparent with regard to things like that. And you can check the monetary aggregates, and you can simply divide the amount of cash into M3, which is what most everybody uses as an indicator of how much cash is actually circulating in the economy.
Okay, here we are. So it says the M1 money supply, M0.
Do you guys have an M0?
An M0, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I'm the Bank of England. Sorry, I'm gonna pull this up for people so they can.
Oh, okay, you're looking at the Bank of England. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my
Okay, so if you take M0 and you just divide that into, and they'll show that probably they'll have a monetary aggregates up to about M3, and that's what they'll say the gross amount of money that's in circulation, and then you just simply divide the amount of cash into that, and then you'll get your percentage.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of maths to do right now. But maybe I'll work this out later.
Yeah, it's not. You'll easily understand it once you start digging into the monetary aggregates.
Yeah, I was maybe an ambitious. I
And,
was
and
hoping
just
the
be
site would tell me straight up just what it was.
No, none of this stuff is that transparent. It's
Well, I was hoping someone might have done the calculations for me, as the hope is
um.
always with Google.
Well, I think they did. I think Positive Money UK
Oh
did
yeah,
calculations.
right. Positive Money will have it. I had the guys from Positive Money on this show.
Okay. Um, so, and their percentages will be very similar to the ones in Canada because I did a comparative analysis one time, and they're almost identical. And the actual percentage continues to drop. That percentage of cash to the amount of digital money in circulation.
Yeah, of course it does. If you can just create new money by just like typing in some numbers. This seems like it's one of those things that, right, I hear people say this, okay, and I know it to be true, right? But it still
Mhm.
feels insane to me that that's the way that like how much of the money creation is that, and how much of it is being done at a central bank level.
Almost none of it's done at the central bank level. So
Okay.
all of the money in circulation is basically created through the loans process by privately owned commercial banks.
Right. Okay. So these privately owned commercial banks, so it's not the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England or the
No,
Bank of Canada doing any of
no.
the money creation. Right. Okay. So when people talk about quantitative easing, right, is that not them creating the money at central bank level?
The way quantitative easing works is the central bank, or I'll use the Bank of Canada example because I'm somewhat more familiar with it.
Yeah.
So they'll purchase, and again, I'm going to use the correct terminology. This is what the Bank of Canada uses, which is a more exacting terminology.
Okay.
They acquire securities off the secondary market.
Okay.
Now, you have to understand the difference between the primary market and the secondary market. So the government, when it's, short of funds, it'll issue securities of bonds, just like a company would when it needs to raise extra money. So that's what the government does. So it raises, yeah. So I kind of lost my train of thought here. What was the original question?
The question is like, what is quantitative easing doing? Is that not creating money at the top at a central bank level?
Well, what it does is the central bank creates what they call settlement balances in exchange for securities off the secondary market.
Okay.
So these are securities where money was already created for the government previous, and these securities, which are treasury bills and bonds, are floating around on the secondary market being traded between different financial institutions and pension funds, trust funds, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So quantitative easing is designed to increase liquidity in the private commercial banking sector.
Okay.
So by the central bank acquiring, and central bank doesn't get this money from anywhere. It creates new settlement balances in exchange for these securities.
Okay.
Now, the central bank here in Canada is now paying 4% interest on those settlement balances, because these are accounts that the banks hold at the central bank. So right around now, there's about $188 billion in settlement balances that were created through QE. But I'll just use 200 billion as an example. So 4% of that is like $8 billion that the Bank of Canada is paying to commercial banks, which doesn't help government funding, doesn't help the public at all. What it does is it increases liquidity in the private banking sector.
Okay. So I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I've got this right, because I've had several people explain this to me, and I want to really make sure I've absolutely nailed this. So what's happening is at a central bank level, they are creating settlement balances, which are being used to pay for assets on a secondary market. Is that exclusively government bonds and securities, or is there other stuff in there?
Yeah, quantitative easing is that those are the securities that they're buying and creating these settlement balances for.
Okay. So who's creating these? Who creates the government bonds? Actually, is it the government?
Yeah, it's the government.
Right.
And just like I said, that part's not that complicated. It's just like a company. When a company wants to increase its capital position because it wants to expand its factory, whatever, regardless, they're short of funds. So they issue securities so that they can cover the shortfall that they can't get through taxation and other revenue.
Okay, right. So then this money is being pumped into the commercial banks who had owned those government bonds and government securities.
Right. So now the central bank holds both those securities.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the settlement balances are locked in, and the Bank of Canada pays this exorbitant interest on those settlement balances. Like I said, there's like $8 billion if you calculate it over the whole year.
So do the settlement balances ever leave the central bank, or are they just sort of on a computer there and just get left there?
Well, they're on there until say the banks. Because they're trying to return to normal, which is called quantitative tightening now.
Mm-hmm.
So if, say, a commercial bank wants to take the security back, then it takes a security back and it uses its settlement balances to take it back. And then you'll see a drop on the Bank of Canada balance sheet by whatever amount that is.
Okay. Right. I think I've got it right. So then... But you're saying that doesn't actually make up a massive amount of the actual money creation.
No, it does.
Sorry. This is the thing that makes up all of the money creation. Is this transaction that you're describing here?
Well, this is what because the Bank of Canada expanded its balance sheet. by this amount. And again, this is not money for the government or any, this is money for the private banking sector. It's, to me, it's absurd. So it's, but,
Yeah. So why are we propping them up? Like,
because that's the way it's designed. Our whole financial system, and that's the function of the Bank of Canada, is to help support the banking and financial system. But it's also a little bit more complicated than that, in that the Bank of Canada also acts as the fiscal agent for the government. So it has this dual role, and sometimes they conflict.
I was
Because
about to say,
basically the
yeah.
Bank of Canada is the banker's bank and also the federal government's bank.
So they're everyone's bank, essentially.
No, I wouldn't put it in those terms. The bank of, you and I can't get an account at the Bank of Canada.
No,
So it's,
no, I mean
yeah.
like indirectly because we have to bank with all of the big banks, and
Well,
then
the Bank of Canada is definitely, it's part of the whole banking and financial system. So,
okay. So how would this differ in a sovereign money system?
well, in a sovereign money system, you would take the money creation privilege away from privately owned commercial banks, but there's no way that you could ever do that right away. That's why I suggest the PMC has a transition plan. So if you go to the homepage of PMC, and the first video explains how the transition works. It's just short, maybe a 4-minute video. And basically, it would just have absorb direct issues from the government and would create new money for the government that way. They'd have to add another column onto the Bank of Canada balance sheet, juxtaposed with currency, and they may call it central bank digital currency or just digital currency. But the beauty of this system would be that money could be created for government spending debt-free, because the Bank of Canada working as a fiscal, this blows people's mind, is that the Bank of Canada working as a fiscal agent for the government, any profits that the Bank of Canada has is remitted back to the federal government. It's another important distinction to understand the difference between the central bank and commercial banks, and that is that the central banks generally do not hold retained earnings, and this is definitely true in Canada. So because it doesn't have any retained earnings, the Bank of Canada never has like a big pile of cash ready to buy things or to lend money. Anytime the Bank of Canada acquires a security, it creates either settlement balances or money for the government.
Okay, so the Central Bank of Canada doesn't keep any profits, doesn't keep any money on available. So why should they? Like, what is the case for that being different? Like, isn't that in some way better if they're not working for profit?
It is. So if you look at the mandate, it says it's supposed to be there for the public good.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it's mainly there for the banking and financial system. And that's where we would like to tweak it, so it favors the public rather than the private banking institutions.
Okay. And so how would the sovereign money system, how would that benefit the public more?
Well, as I said, the Bank of Canada could absorb, like through the transition plan, any securities that are offered could be absorbed directly by the Bank of Canada. So essentially, that would be debt-free money that could be put into the government's account for government spending. So you wouldn't need a pass-through like a commercial bank for that effort. And then eventually, in the transition plan, I suggest that we start with our medical system, because that we pay about 22% of our federal taxes go into paying for our medical system. So if we just did that as a start point, and then moved on from there, you run that program for a couple of years, and keeping inflation in check and making sure that any other complications, because of course it's humans are involved in all this, so obviously there's going to be problems. And that's the first step. So we could do that, and eventually you could eliminate taxation, and that's one of the benefits too of applying a sovereign money system is savings in tax. So in addition to this new debt-free money covering the 22% that you would normally pay in federal taxes, the taxpayer would be saving 22%. So they'd have extra money in their pocket, which would also be a stimulus for the economy, because more money in their pockets, more money to spend.
So how do we get no tax from this? This sounds wonderful. I'm sure the libertarians are all on board.
Yeah, well, this is how these things are funded. So this is directly from the Department of Finance, so you can check out all this stuff. But again, in the transition video, it explains all that. But yeah, so you would save on taxation, like 20% of your federal taxes, if you just implemented the sovereign money transition plan by PMC. So you just let that program run for 2 years, and then you keep expounding upon it, and eventually rein in financial markets and unnecessary money creating money part of the non-economy.
Okay, so essentially you're saying that if we stopped money being created out of nothing all the time, and we stuck to this like more centralized way of creating that money within, that's held by only by the Bank of Canada, but to be put to the use of the government for investment, not to be utilized by the commercial banks, that we would be able to reap financial rewards from the smart spending of government money, and maybe even handing out of loans from direct from the government to, I don't know, businesses, that this would like generate enough money to hopefully eliminate the need for taxes. Is that about right?
That's about right.
Okay. So essentially we'd be running the government almost like a bank or like some sort of business. We'd expect it to pay for itself.
Well,
kind of.
People don't realize that, the money, or you have to talk about how inflation happens too. There's a lot of misconceptions about how inflation occurs.
Okay. Well, do you want to clear up some of those misconceptions then? Because I'm sure I probably have some.
Yeah. Okay. I'll use Canada as an example. Of course, the first thing, the right wing generally, or people who are against government spending or government as a whole, the first talking point is government spending leads to inflation and eventually hyperinflation, which is totally fallacious. And there's I have a header titled Hyperinflation, which negates those assertions by people. So in Canada, it was mostly driven by energy costs. So from 2020 to 21, over the year, gasoline prices rose about 33.3%. And actually, in November of that year, rose 43%. So gasoline prices, okay, have knock-on effects. So anytime energy prices rise, anything in transportation rises. Refrigeration costs rise. Anything involved in energy rises. So there's always that knock-on effect. And then we also had extreme weather events during the growing season, which increased grocery prices. And those were the main driving factors in inflation, on top of corporate greed. So it had almost nothing to do with the CERB benefits that the government provided for people, which means that they had, they'd be compensated because they couldn't go to work. almost zero. It's almost immeasurable, but it's very easy to measure what actually caused the inflation that we're currently experiencing. And the majority of it is driven by energy costs. And all you have to do is look at the numbers. Now, if somebody was to come to you and argue and said, well, yeah, that's because of all the government spending. And it says, well, okay, if you look at the other sectors in the consumer price index, well, they're only rising by 4%, just a little more than the 2% average every year. So if this was purely a monetary phenomenon, meaning that it's because the government's spending money, then they would all go up by the same rate. So it's very easy to negate that argument with regards to that.
Isn't that because? Sorry, can I just step in? Like, you'll probably shoot me down here, but let me have my go at arguing with you. So my understanding would be that the increase in the money supply or the government spending itself isn't exactly the problem. It's the fact that we pumped a bunch of money into the economy without actually growing it or creating anything of worth out of it. We just pumped a bunch of money in for just because to increase liquidity or make it seem like there was more in the system or for whatever reason. And that in theory, when you add a bunch of extra money to the system, then it means that it's because there's too much of it, it becomes worth less, right? And then though that excess money flowing around, it sort of pumps the prices up. But in places, like in my head, it didn't necessarily have to be across the board. Like the things people could take advantage of this, or prices could pump up randomly across different parts of the economy. Like it didn't have to be an absolutely universal rise for that to be a result of adding a lot of money to the system. Have I completely got this wrong?
Well, I'll just finish on inflation, which will answer your question.
Okay.
So, and again, the other factor in inflation was pumping all this money into the private banking sector. So creating all this extra liquidity is creating more money for banks. Now, what do banks do when they get more money? They speculate. And in Canada, 20% of the new residential property sales were picked up by investment property dealers, backed by banks, which artificially inflated the prices of real estate, housing. And that was a secondary factor. So it was actually money created for the private banking sector that caused asset inflation. You'll also notice that over the same period from when it first started in 2020, that the stock market was steadily going up.
Mm-hmm.
During this time of crisis when
Yes.
everybody is suffering, the banks and the stock market is doing fine. And to your point about too much money chasing too few goods and services, that is valid over the longer period. But over the shorter period, when you want to determine what is the actual cause of the inflation, you just look at the numbers. And then you look at causation, which is slightly more difficult because, you have to establish things like corporate greed, which takes time to investigate. And with the oil companies, it's pretty clear. I mean, they've been fixing prices for years. But it's, so that's basically it with inflation. Almost none of it had to do with government spending. It had to do with the commercial banks through QE, creating all this liquidity in the commercial banking sector, which again is based on this flawed theory that, okay, if the banks have more money, they're more likely to lend. Well, banks don't need more money to lend anyway. So it's...
That's such a good point, man.
Man, it's bizarre how these concepts escape people. And now that the banks are raising interest rates to try to collapse, and what will happen is the economy will fall into a bit of a recession because then people are more likely to pay off their loans and they're less likely to take out new loans. But it's there's so many things wrong with our system, but this is, this is not a panacea. This is just a start point. There's so many things that we have to do to
Mm.
correct our system to make it a more egalitarian and fair monetary system.
Yeah, I just want to read this line from your website. Actually, I found your hyperinflation header. It said the case study of Weimar Republic shows that not even public money creation, but private bank money creation triggered hyperinflation, which is really interesting because
Exactly. And
it's probably an important distinction.
oh, for sure, because and that's actually what's happening with QE right now. So that actually causes asset inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Property values were inflated, and also the stock market was
Mm-hmm.
also inflated. Because what do banks do? This is what they're designed to do. These are not evil people. This is just because this is the way the system is designed, and profit is the most important thing.
Mm. Yeah, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, except it's become
Well, it is a bad
well.
thing.
But I mean, just the like the pursuit of profit isn't necessary. Is in terms of like economic growth and just running the country is like not a bad thing. But what is bad that it's become
It's bad
it's
when it's money, which should be a public utility. It's when money makes money. That is a problem.
mm,
So the more money you have, you just automatically make money. There's a problem with that in itself. Um, money itself is being a store of value, unit of account, and a medium of exchange. Yeah, that's great. Okay. But the important aspect of money is actually distribution. Who gets to create it and how it's distributed?
mm.
Who gets the use of that first money?
So the MMT people that I've had on this show before have made the case to me that the government should just use this quantitative easing power that they have, essentially, and use it to buy everything we want. um, which seems like a pipe dream to me. And I know you've got a couple of explainers out there about what MMT gets wrong, because like at first glance it seems like you and the MMT people share a lot of the same beliefs in some aspects of how the financial system works. But what is it that you think they get wrong, and what have they not understood correctly?
Well, MMT is a mishmash of ill-conceived concepts, and it depends on who you talk to and when.
Mm.
However, the cornerstone of the MMT descriptive analysis of how our current financial system works is their STAB hypothesis, which is they claim that the government must spend first before taxing and borrowing can occur,
Mm-hmm.
which gets government financing completely backward. And it leads to other MMT fallacies like federal taxes don't pay for anything. So this fraud has gone on for like 20 years plus. And I break it down in the debunking MMT page. The first video is modern money forget theory, debunking the STAB hypothesis. And I explain how they do it. And I'm directly quoting them. I don't know if you've read The Deficit Myth or anything by Randall Wray,
I haven't
but
read it. No.
publications that I'm taking this from. So this is not me an opinion based. This is what they're saying. And anyways, I encourage you to watch the videos or go to the debunking MMT page, because I make it pretty clear what the problems are with MMT. Like first, right away, you're going to be shaking your head when MMT claims that federal taxes don't pay for anything. But Stephanie Kelton says it right in her book. And then I asked Warren Moser, who's one of the founders of MMT, I questioned directly. I says, okay, do you believe federal taxes don't pay for anything? And I pushed him on the point. And that's on record, by the way, on the debunking MMT page where I questioned Warren Moser. And he said, well, I wouldn't characterize it like that. Okay, you wouldn't characterize like that. Well, this is what Stephanie Kelton says in her book. So that's the most important, but MMT gets other things wrong too. So basically, it's just as you imagine it, Josh. Taxing and borrowing precede government spending. In other words, tabs. And there's documentation and data to support this assertion, whereas MMT lacks anything of substance. So in the second video that I produced, I show through cash flows.
Can we just pause here sorry, can we just pause here to just clarify for people who are listening, and also to make sure I understand correctly. The MMT people believe that the government spends the money and then afterwards they tax it to take money out of the system, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Whereas taxation is just simply money that's being recirculated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's just the way you would imagine it, Josh. So there's, it's just another confusing thing that MMT does. So I explain how they do it in the videos.
Okay, well, yeah, I was just pulling some of the videos up there for people to have a look at on screen, and then I'll put the links for all the stuff that we're discussing in the description for people. So,
and I also should say, and also when in the second video, we're explaining how the financial system actually works, and I use real cash flows, I use real data from the government of Canada, and again also. Affirmations from the Department of Finance. So it's the dumbest, most embarrassingly stupid thing that, and it perpetuates to this day. But as soon as you look at it and start to ask them questions, like straightforward questions that they can never answer, you realize it's a fraud.
There's a lot of that going around.
Yeah.
People unable to answer straightforward questions, unfortunately, in far too many aspects of our lives.
Yeah,
and they think it's okay. That's the bit that irritates me. Take it as like
becoming normalized, right?
It's like a personal attack. If you ask a question, it's like, no, man, I want to know why you think you're right.
That actually is a good point you just made about a personal attack. So, of course, because I'm explaining and asking these questions, I've been called every name in the book. And, like, I guess you have to have a thick skin. But, I mean, the truth tells all.
Mm-hmm. What are they coming at you with? Like, what are they saying that you've not got correct?
Well, there are certain MMT talking points. For example, they'll say that, when I'm asking the question, okay, well, you say the government creates all the money, but then I'll ask Warren Mosler. I says, well, it's privately owned commercial banks that create all the money. He says, yes, right? This is one of the founders. So that it's full of contradictions. And, but he says, but they're agents of Congress. No, there's nothing in the Federal Reserve Act that says they're agents of Congress. And even if they were, they don't work on behalf of the government or the public. They're a profit-making company, and that's their only interest is making a profit. So when they create a loan, their main motive is profit. Wouldn't you say that's right, Warren? Yes. So there's another video in the as you scroll down the debunking MMT page where I question him. I think what's it titled? Do you have it on your screen there?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So scroll down to see. I think it's the
debunking Stephanie Kelton's working paper 244. Or
okay, go lower, and it's a video called "The End of Stab" with Warren Mosler.
Ah, yeah, here it is. The end of stab.
So, anyways,
I don't get what he like. Did he actually try and tell you that the banks are working for the commercial banks are working for Congress?
Yeah,
because has he does he know how puppet strings work? right? They go up, like it's the people above with the money. They're the ones with the strings, right?
Well, this is how twisted the logic is. It's like, if you tell Josh, you know yourself, if you tell one lie, you got to tell 10,000 other lies to support it.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing, falls under scrutiny like quite easily. But I was really surprised that they allowed me to ask Warren these questions for as long as I was able to. It was some Green Party event because none of these people will debate me. Stephanie Kelt, Warren Mosler, Steve Keen, none of these people will actually publicly debate me in like a forum like this and have it recorded. Because I guess, because I'm basically a nobody anyway. So they've got nothing to win and everything to lose. So that's another reason. But the truth will come out eventually, I hope. But
What do you think they're afraid of? Just like looking stupid?
yeah,
Because like you could.
it's unfortunate, but the people, especially when it comes to monetary reform, a lot of it's ego driven with a lot of people that I've seen in this field, because a lot of people get into this because they want to feel like they're the smartest person in the room. And they like that thing of being able to talk over people and, oh, you just don't understand. And this is what MMTers do too. When you ask them a direct question, like I have, like if you go through the debunking MMT page and they say, oh, you just don't understand. You have to read more MMT. That's another common MMT talking point. Instead of answering a question directly, yeah, you have to read more MMT. So they have like talking points like that they fall to all the time. That's just a couple of them, but they have more.
So it's like, oh, you're too stupid to understand. It's not. It's like if you can't explain your idea, it can't be that good, you know. Like
Albert Einstein had a beautiful quote. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then you don't understand it yourself.
hmm.
And it's very true. Like, I'm sure that everything I've explained to you makes sense. And any questions that you've had, hopefully I've been able to answer them. And you can cut me off at any time if there's something you don't understand. But I have no agenda. And I have no ego about this stuff. It's just something I realize needs to be changed.
Mm.
And I'm pretty comfortable, and I'm only willing to do so much myself. And I'm glad that I had this opportunity to talk with you to, share this information. But I'm not going to be marching in front of the Bank of Canada for 2 weeks on end with posters and things like that.
Mm.
I'm hopefully this information can get other people energized so that, if there is a movement, well, yeah, maybe it will, if we can get enough people to understand the basics of it and then make change.
Mm.
And we've actually had some success too, like actually through we have like a contact, Yvonne Baker, which is an MLA representative. He's on the finance committee,
Mm-hmm.
federal finance committee. And so we've explained some of these things to him, how we could just, empower the Bank of Canada to create money debt free. That would solve a lot of our problems. Money should never be an issue. But unfortunately, again, as I say, one of the worst major problems with allowing commercial banks this incredible privilege to create money is they only create money if they think they can make a profit. So that's contrary to the public good. Like, say we want parks, say we want to address climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Education is something too that's gotten out of hand since the 60s. The fact that students have to go $400,000 in debt to get a degree, that's absurd. It should be paid by the government, because in the end, who benefits by it? The country benefits by it, by educating the population. It empowers the population. But again, private interests, they don't care about that. They only care about profit. And again, it's not because they're evil. That is by design.
So I, I every time I discuss the central banking system in any way, right, I just sit there and I'll start, and the longer the conversation goes on, the more the same thought rings in my head. It's like, who decided this was a good idea? Like, who passed this law that says that that's like that what you're explaining, which honestly seems like the way it should be, and I reckon most people might even think that's the way it is, right? That if the government wants money that they are in charge of spending, and it's them technically like running the country in which we have the central bank, why can't they just have some of the money that they can just magic into existence without interest?
Well, you nailed it. It really is that simple. But you have to realize how our whole banking and financial system evolved. And of course, you've heard of the revolving door where CEOs from a particular company get into government. They pass a few laws that are favorable to the company. They get out and then they return to it with higher wages and benefits. There's a huge influence that bank lobbyists, and the financial elites have on government. So I would also like to see, government being more transparent, people being more empowered. But right now, a lot of, representatives, they work for their donors, not their constituents. So depending on where the money's coming in from, that's who they'll work for. For example, oil companies. In Canada, Alberta's like, that's where the tar sands are and whatnot, and they're very right-wingish. So the government is heavily influenced by the oil industry.
Well, they're
and that's another thing.
They're the ones with the money, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's something that we have to. There's some, again, I said this is just a starting point. Is the transition plan is a starting point, but we have to open up this whole thing. There should also be a royal commission into the banking and financial system, and I want to be on that panel.
I want you on that panel. How did we get you on that panel?
Oh yeah, I'll be there. Even if I have to pay my own way. But it has to be open, and we have to change this system. But to me, it's a natural evolution, because the people who have the money, just like, any other human, you want to protect your own turf. And that's what they are. They write all these laws that are advantageous to their position, because they have the wherewithal to do it. So to me, it makes perfect sense. And that's why we continue to see the gap between the very rich and the very poor increasing all the time.
So, like, once we transitioned to this post fractional reserve world, right? Post all the commercial banks having the ability to create all this money.
Fractional reserve doesn't actually.
Is that not an accurate term?
No.
Okay.
But we can talk about that in a second.
Okay, so that would be really interesting, actually. But yeah, so once we get to this sovereign money world, actually it's a better way to put it, then how big would the financial sector actually be? Like, do we need a financial sector? Because it seems like they're not good for an economy. I don't know if you're familiar with Nicholas Shaxson's The Finance Curse. I think I talk about it on every other podcast. I don't know if are you familiar with his work?
No.
Okay. Well, you would really enjoy that book, because it's basically an analysis of how much of a drain on the economy the financial sector is, and how much growth that we have lost over the past 40 years as a result of the size of the financial sector. So he compares it to like a resource curse, like Angola, for example, in Africa. But we are cursed with the outsized financial sector instead of abundant oil resources.
Yes. So to expound on what you said, um, there are limits to how much money a bank can create, and it's assumed that they cannot cause an explosion in the money supply. But that's only true in part. Since the 1990s, this is probably corroborated in the book that you've read, or this guy.
Mhm.
I've read tons of them, but I can't read everything.
Mm.
So since the 1990s, banks have created huge amounts of virtual money that ended up largely in financial markets. Um, these form a kind of virtual economy with few ties to the real economy, of the production of and consumption of goods and services. So much of the money thus created ended up in complex financial products, famously called financial weapons of mass destruction by American billionaire and super investor Warren Buffett.
Mm.
These products were the basis for the 2008 financial crisis. Post-crisis, after a brief downturn, growth in this speculative financial system has resumed just as before,
Yeah.
leading to an ever-growing risk of a new crisis. One more thing that just popped into my head. There's this monetary expert, Bernard Liatier, estimated in 2010 that of the $4 trillion traded daily in currency transactions, only 2% was of significance for the real economy. Example for exporting or importing goods and services. The other 98% was used purely for speculation. So I totally agree with your position.
98% was for speculation.
Yes. And it's consistent with QE.
Yeah.
Banks get money. What do? They speculate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, look what happened to look what happened to the crypto markets through 2020, 2021. All those big institutions claiming that they weren't spending their money on it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't buy that for a second.
Yeah. I have a page kind of dedicated to cryptocurrencies.
Ooh, I'll have to check
There's
that one out.
problems with that too.
Yeah, there definitely is. But what is it they always say? Bitcoin is not crypto. There's their Ponzi schemes, and then there's the one that might actually maybe work. So the last thing, yeah. So for the last thing, you were gonna explain to me why fractional reserve banking is not actually what happens.
Yeah. So this is still taught in macroeconomic textbooks to this day, and is taught right to the highest levels of academia in universities. So in Canada, even when there were fractional reserves, it actually didn't work like that. There was research instituted by Basil Moore in the 70s and later corroborated by Kidlin and Prescott, where that the causation was actually the reverse. So banks would create the loans first, then they would go looking for reserves later, and they had like a 2-week period to adjust their books. So even when there were reserve requirements, but in Canada, we went off reserve requirements in July of 1994. They were weaned out over a period of 2 years. And so now there is no reserve requirement whatsoever. So what restricts the amount of money that banks can create? Well, they have capital adequacy requirement ratios, which is incredibly complex. And I have like a short video that I did. I don't even look into it anymore. And it's so complex. It's basically a veil so that the people that are actually manipulating the numbers, they can get away with more things. To me, that's the only reason why it's as complex as it is.
Yeah, I mean that would not surprise me, not at all.
I should say one more thing about fractional reserve banking. You can pick up any macroeconomic textbook, and it'll explain you how fractional reserve banking theoretically works. So theoretically, a bank is supposed to have, say, a certain percentage of reserves, which is cash, always in their coffers. And the only money that they can lend out is excess reserves. But it doesn't work like that at all.
Okay. Because it's just like the only thing it's based on is these I can't remember what you said. These ratio requirement, this the magic algorithm that tells them how much they can.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And some of the things like in the capital adequacy requirement ratios is they have like again, it's very complex, and I have a video. It's worth listening to, but I have it in a PDF form too, so you don't have to listen to me babble away, because it's about 14 minutes long or something like that. But I mean, I'm laughing while I'm doing this, like how ridiculously complex this whole thing is. And they also have one way to calculate risk for a bank is called their internal ratings-based approach, which means they determine the amount of risk rather than an independent body.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's worth listening to at least once, but again, there's the PDF supplement too that goes along with it.
Okay, I'll see if I can find that for people as well. The last thing, actually, I wanted to ask you about, I found your crypto page, I think, but you talk about central bank digital currency, which is something that I discuss endlessly on this show at the moment, but mainly because I'm terrified of the government having the ability to program your money. So what?
That's definitely an issue. And in fact, like if we were going to create like debt-free money, we'd have to create like an extra column on the Bank of Canada balance sheet. Now, what are you going to label that? Because one column would be for currency, okay, and the other one would be for digital currency. So privacy is a concern for a lot of people, the fact that they can map out, and this is definitely an issue, and I don't have any real answers for that yet. I mean, to me, it's almost like personal preference. Like to me, I'm not concerned about having my money recorded on every transaction.
Oh,
so
that's not what concerns me at all. It's the ability for the government to like, because the feature of the central bank digital currencies that have been rolled out in China, for example, the one that's been trialed for the past 2 years, delineates what you can spend your money on, and then can just be like your account can just be like just frozen immediately, and your money is no longer your money. Those are the two bits of it that terrify me, especially in the UK, when we've like passed a law that says loud protest is illegal now, and there's a law going through our parliament that says that the police will have the ability to preemptively go and like put injunctions in place and arrest people who have done nothing wrong.
Okay, that's super scary. And of course, PMC is all about empowering people. So all these things have to be completely transparent. And if there was another column that you put down on the Bank of Canada balance sheet for digital currency, then of course, all those issues that you just brought up would have to be addressed. And of course, I'm against everything that you said. I'm in total agreement with you. So that would be, again, part of the process.
So you think there would be a way to like do it without having these horrible features?
Exactly. Well, you could, like, by simply saying that, okay, yeah, there's a digital currency now, we're spending it directly. And what's the beautiful thing about it is you wouldn't have to, all you have to have is a number, like a serial number attached to the dollar value, just like you have on real currency. And then it floats through the economy. And I don't have any problem with that at all. But they have no ability to freeze your accounts. Now, what you were talking about is central bank digital currencies having a direct account with the central bank. And to me, I don't even advocate that. I think the money should be created debt-free and then floats around. And banks would still have a purpose. They just wouldn't have that extraordinary privilege of creating money out of nothing. So they would move money for you the same way they do now. And it would work more like it actually, how they say it works in macroeconomic textbooks, the circular income model,
Yeah.
where they all they do is they move money from one place to another. And then sure, you can charge a fee for that. Um, and then they could compete with each other about, who charges the least amount of fees, gets the most customers. And if they had to say, if you wanted to say have a loan from your local bank, well, they would have to borrow the money from the Bank of Canada. And if it was something like like a boat or something, luxury item or whatever, the Bank of Canada could lend that to the commercial bank for like 0%. But all those kinds of things are, logistics exercises that would follow. Like once you got it, it's a step-by-step process this could never happen all at once. So you have to take that first step. And what you said about, to me, that's terrifying. That idea of a central bank digital currency. So again, it's totally how it's implemented. It's about who creates that money and how it's distributed. So with the Progressive Money Canada plan, it would just be simply digital money that first starts through government spending, through programs that are productive, like through our medical plan or whatever. And then that money goes into a doctor's account, a nurse's account, and that nurse goes out and spends something at the grocery store. The grocery store guy goes and spends it on something else, and it just floats, just like actual currency does. It's just, if it was digital, then it would have a mark, so you'd be able to know, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. But to actually attach it to an account, I totally disagree. You should have an account at your local bank just like any other account. So I'm kind of against having a direct account.
I've just had the most hilarious idea that are, you know what an NFT is, right?
Sorry?
Do you know what an NFT is?
That's some kind of a crypto thing.
Yeah, so it's not really, it kind of is. So it's a non-fungible token. So it's like a digital stamp that something is, that's it. That's the only one those that exists, and it can be traded on the blockchain. So people use it mainly for like stupid digital art pictures at the minute, right? And there was people speculating and making obscene amounts of money off of them over the last couple of years, but that doesn't interest me at all. What interests me is this non-replicability thing. It's like you have a stamp that says this is it. This is the only one of that will exist. And what you can do is you can fractionalize that, so you can take like tiny fractions of that. And I was just like, what if there was only one Canadian dollar, like digital, as a digital NFT, and all of the things we traded were fractionalized versions of that? Because that would work the same way. It would just be a token that represents something that like floats around the internet, that's like non-replicable, that can be identified like a serial number, and that just floats around the system.
See, I don't get how that would be any improvement to what we have right now.
Because it's doing exactly what you're saying. It would just be like a digital piece of money that would float around the system, but there would be a finite number of them that would be controlled by a central source and issued by one source. So that's how they could issue the money. Obviously, this is just like really stupid, like blue sky thinking about how it might work in the future. But anyway, before I say anything else stupid, let's wrap this up. So, Jeff, I really, really want to thank you for joining me. It's been very, very educational. You've done the best job possible of explaining how quantitative easing works and where modern monetary theory gets it wrong. So you've actually cleared up quite a lot for me. So thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Josh.
So I will put the links for Progressive Money Canada and all the different pages that we went through in the description below for people. Is there anything else you want to point people towards aside from your site?
No, nothing with regards to that. I was just curious about how when you post it, and if you could forward the link to me.
Oh, of course, definitely. Don't worry, I'll not forget to do that.
Okay.
So yeah, man, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Josh.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.